I had a little, what we call a come to Jesus meeting with the executive editor of the Springfield News Leader this week. Contact between the executive editor and a lowly opinion columnist is fairly rare, generally about once every 2 or 3 years. When it happens, it is always a come to Jesus meeting of one sort or another. This one took place because the editor had gone over the head of our opinion page editor, Linda Light, and changed the wording of one of my recent columns. He would have said that he was toning it down a little bit, something editors do sometimes when my editors would like for me to be a nicer chap than I am. And you all can sympathize with that because sometimes you would like for me to be nicer than I am. And so I responded to his decision to change my wording with a little cryptic message explaining my views on journalism. I sent him a 2-sentence message. Journalism is the publishing of something someone doesn't want you to publish. Everything else is self-promotion. He thought we should talk. Now, I am honestly completely sympathetic with the fact that it is his role to produce a product that people will buy and in which businesses will pay to advertise. But I implored him to understand that from my perspective, I write for the paper because there are topics of great ethical importance that I want to keep before the public. It's not difficult to see then that we are regularly at cross purposes. I believe that the free press, like the unfettered pulpit, are both crucial to keeping the government honest. But publishers have to acknowledge that the free press is not free. Every newspaper is dependent upon subscribers and advertisers. But as we have seen illustrated so clearly in the past year, money is speech. Corporations are not people, but money is speech. But the people who have the most money, even though they may get most of the TV time and the radio time and most of the space in print, that doesn't have anything to do with whether they're telling the truth or not. Aaron Sorkin has created a new series for HBO that was just launched this week. It stars Jeff Daniels as a TV news anchor who is very intelligent, apparently rather bitter and jaded, and also more than a little delusional, probably even, I would say, schizophrenic. He imagines seeing people in the audience who hold up signs, trying to get him to come out from behind his nonpartisan neutral news reporter disguise so that he could tell the absolute truth. It is interesting to me that, as we saw in the old movie Bulworth, for any public figure to tell the absolute unvarnished truth, to make it believable, the person doing the talking has to be a little bit crazy. You never get to see an adamant prophet who's entirely sane. They're always portrayed as being a little crazy. I don't normally do this, but I want to show you a 4-minute clip from the inaugural show, and I'm going to say that it may be the best 4 minutes of television that I've ever seen.
Let's move on to the next question. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jenny. I'm a sophomore, and this is for all 3 of you. Can you say in 1 sentence or less what... you know what I mean. Can you say why America is the greatest country in the world?
Diversity and opportunity.
Lewis?
Freedom and freedom. So let's keep it that way.
Will?
The New York Jets.
No, I'm going to hold you to an answer on that. What makes America the greatest country in the world?
Well, Lewis and Sharon said it, diversity and opportunity and freedom and freedom.
I'm not letting you go back to the airport without answering the question.
Well, our Constitution is a masterpiece. James Madison was a genius. The Declaration of Independence is, for me, the single greatest piece of American writing. You don't look satisfied.
One's a set of laws and the other's a declaration of war. I want a human moment from you. What about the people? Why is America
Not the greatest country in the world, Professor. That's my answer.
You're saying...
Yes.
Let's talk about...
Fine. Sharon, the NEA is a loser. Yeah, it accounts for a penny out of our paycheck, but he gets to hit you with it anytime he wants. It doesn't cost money. It costs votes. It costs airtime and column inches. You know why people don't like liberals? Because they lose. If liberals are so
Smart, how come they lose so always?
Hey, and with a straight face, you're going to tell students that America is so star-spangled awesome that we're the only ones in the world who have freedom?
Canada has freedom. Japan has freedom. The UK, France, Italy, Germany, Spain,
Australia, Belgium has freedom. So 207 sovereign states in the world, like 180 of them have freedom.
All right.
And yeah, you, sorority girl.
Just in case you accidentally wander into a voting booth one day,
There's some things you should know, and one of them is there is absolutely no evidence to support the statement that we're the greatest country in the world. We're 7th in literacy, 27th in math, 22nd in science, 49th in life expectancy, 178th in infant mortality, 3rd in median household income, number 4 in labor force, and number 4 in exports. We lead the world in only 3 categories: number of incarcerated citizens per capita, number of adults who believe angels are real, and defense spending, where we spend more than the next 26 countries combined, 25 of whom are allies. Now, none of this is the fault of a 20-year-old college student, but you nonetheless are, without a doubt, a member of the worst generation ever. So when you ask what makes us the greatest country in the world, I don't know what the you're talking about. Yosemite? Sure used to be. We stood up for what was right. We fought for moral reasons. We passed laws, struck down laws for moral reasons. We waged wars on poverty, not poor people. We sacrificed. We cared about our neighbors. We put our money where our mouths were, and we never beat our chest. We built great big things, made ungodly technological advances, explored the universe, cured diseases, and we cultivated the world's greatest artists and the world's greatest economy. We reached for the stars, acted like men. We aspired to intelligence. We didn't belittle it. It didn't make us feel inferior. We didn't identify ourselves by who we voted for in the last election, and we didn't scare so easy. We were able to be all these things and do all these things because we were informed by great men, men who were revered. First step in solving any problem is recognizing there is one. America is not the greatest country in the world anymore. Enough?
I always love it when you all applaud a film clip. I'm sure they can't hear, but I understand how you feel. Of course, the news anchor in this series suffers horrible consequences for his lapse into honesty, which is not expected in the media. That's what keeps most politicians using very important sounding words. Freedom, freedom. You know, we use words that sound important, but when you actually go back and try to analyze one of their speeches, they've said nothing at all. That's why if you did a free association test on almost anyone in America, if you ask them, say the first word that comes to your mind, and then say, sermon, the first word they will say is boring. Almost every pastor I know has been willing to exchange relevance for job security. We normally have only one scripture reading in our services. Today we have two because they both illustrate a very familiar point from two different periods of our ancient faith history, separated by nearly 600 years. Both Ezekiel and Jesus were aware that they had to say things that nobody wanted to hear. The job of a prophet is to say things that make people want to cover their ears. The job of a journalist is to write things somebody doesn't want you to print. The job of a prophet is to tell the truth, even when people don't want to hear it. The truth, St. John says, will set you free, but before it sets you free, it's very likely to make you angry. And yet it is the willingness to expose ourselves to things that we don't want to hear that inspires us to change the world, to change ourselves, to make ourselves better people. That's what keeps us honest. And if in fact we want to be able to say that ours is the greatest nation in the world, we have to be willing to put some meat on those bones. Because it should be becoming obvious to all of us that we cannot simply rest on the memory of the greatest generation. The spiritual death I see in our culture, and I love the way Jeff Daniels' character phrases it, is that we've gone from a war on poverty to a war on the poor. President Johnson's initiative in the war on poverty was more successful than we generally give him credit for. In the 1970s, churches weren't talking about homeless people. It's not that there weren't homeless in America, it's just that we didn't see the kind of numbers that we see now. The war on poverty gave way economically in terms of our budget priorities to the war on drugs, which has been, in my estimation, a total failure. Did you know that if we transferred the money that we are spending on the war on drugs into higher education, that we could pay off every student loan in America? You don't have to be more than an armchair sociologist to realize that most of drug addiction is motivated by the depression people feel when they believe that they do not have a future. If we had free college education in America, I'm going to stand here behind this pulpit and tell you that you would see a greater reduction in drug use than by anything the war on drugs has ever accomplished, if we simply invested in the future of our children. Amen. If you want to do more than just stick out your chest and thump it and say that we're the greatest nation in the world because you happen to live here, then you know that you have to invest in the future. Rather than making education easier to obtain, we're making it nearly impossible for the poor to go to college, to become, then, tax-paying successful citizens. 50 years ago, when President Eisenhower led our nation in investing in our own infrastructure, creating our nation's interstate highways, that made the following economic success of the 60s and the 70s and the 80s possible. But over the last 25 years, the total number of cars on the road has doubled, but the amount of paved road has not increased by as much as 1%. We've gone from being the world's leader in transportation to now we're number 24 out of 124 sovereign nations. Our bridges and our roads are crumbling, as if we did not believe that we have a future, as if we did not believe that we would need to have an economy a few years from now. In terms of GDP, Norway, South Korea, and Australia are spending twice as much on transportation as we are. China is building 50 new airports now. Even struggling European economies in Spain and the United Kingdom are spending 50% more of their GDP on transportation than we are. Americans keep talking about improving our infrastructure, but according to polls reported in Time magazine, and I hate to just stand up here and quote a bunch of statistics because I firmly believe that 32.7% of all statistics are made up on the spot. But in polling done by Time magazine, they're reporting that 71% of Americans oppose any new gas tax. We want better roads and bridges, but we don't want to pay for it. 64% of Americans oppose even putting toll booths out on new roads to pay for them. I guess 100% of us would like for the Tooth Fairy to build our roads and bridges. The column my editor altered was about access to health care. Nationwide, about 10% of Americans don't have health insurance. In Missouri, it's nearly 18%, almost double what it is in the rest of the country. And yet many of the people I know are adamantly opposed to health care reform that will give access to those millions of people because they may personally lose something in the change. I referred to those people in my column as being moral midgets. My editor said that was name-calling. I said it was demonstrably, objectively true. I believe that he thinks I'm a little bit crazy. I think that he's probably right. I'm just counting on you to be a little bit crazy, too. When I was a college student, I had a very annoying medical problem. I've told some of you about it, I know. Is a virus in the skin of the sole of my foot called a plantar's wart. It's very painful, and I started college at Western Kentucky University, which is built on a hillside in Kentucky, what we would call a mountain here in the Ozarks. I had to do a lot of walking. It was very, very painful. And I kept going back to this podiatrist who tried everything that was done in those days. He used a scalpel and cut it out, it would heal, and it would come right back. He put acid packs on it and burned it, and as soon as the flesh would grow back, the wart came back. And he even tried electrically just burning the spots, but it always came back. And finally, the doctor told me, after a couple of years, he said, these sorts of things will only go away when you believe they will go away. And when I told my father what the doctor said, my father said, without missing a beat, you tell him to just keep sending me a bill until he believes that it has been paid. Now, my dad was a little cynical about those things, but I want to point out to you a very peculiar passage in our gospel lesson today. It's printed there in your bulletin from Mark. When Jesus went to preach in his hometown, the people there who knew him, who had seen him grow up, didn't want to accept him as a religious teacher. And right there in verses 5 and 6 in Mark chapter 6, it says that he could do no deed of power there. He couldn't do it because they didn't believe in him. Matthew and Luke copy almost all of Mark, but they don't copy that sentence. And even Mark, you have to see, Dr. Hendrick and I were discussing what originated with Jesus and what originated with the church. I believe the original sentence said that he could do no deed of power there, and he was amazed at their unbelief. But even Mark added a little qualifier, except he laid his hands on a few people in the other. Well, that's a deed of power. But even Mark had difficulty admitting that Jesus, who is the hero of his story, had difficulty doing anything of significance because the people around him didn't believe in him. But you know, in most of the formulas of the healing accounts reported in the Gospels, Jesus says to the person healed, go, your faith has made you well. Doesn't take credit for it himself. Go, your faith has made you well. Without the faith of the people, Jesus couldn't do anything. You would have never heard of Gandhi if he had made the Salt March all by himself. If it hadn't been for the thousands of people following him on the Salt March, he would have never succeeded in liberating India. And no matter how brilliant Martin Luther King Jr. was, and he was brilliant, he was a great writer and a great preacher, but if no one had marched with him, if he alone had been arrested, beaten, imprisoned, If he alone had been standing on that balcony and been shot without thousands of people gathering to listen to him speak, he would have rated a couple of inches perhaps in the Memphis Press Scimitar back in the metro section that April 5th morning after he had been shot the evening before. If you want to be able to say that America is the greatest nation in the world, and you want to say it with a straight face, then we've got to end homelessness. We've got to stop just taking meals down to homeless shelters. We've got to end homelessness. We need to end the extremities of poverty. Every sick person should be able to get medical treatment in the greatest country in the world, and it shouldn't bankrupt them. Every child of the poor should be able to get an education so that they can go out and end the cycle of poverty in their family. And that can happen if you believe that it can happen. It will work if you make it work. If you are willing to sacrifice for it. If you refuse to give up until it's happened. But to do that, you either have to have an awful lot of faith, or you have to be kind of crazy. Doesn't matter to me which one you choose.
You've been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at reverenddray@aol.com for more information.